The greatest mistakes in your life were not failures of intelligence, they were failures of timing. Not what you chose, but when you chose it. And if you're honest, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. That email you sent too quickly. You read something that triggered you. Maybe it felt disrespectful. Maybe it challenged your authority. Your body reacted before your mind had time to catch up. Your chest tightened. Your thoughts sharpened. You started typing. Fast, precise, emotional. In that moment, it felt justified. It felt necessary. Like if you didn't respond immediately, you would lose something. Control, respect, position. So you hit send, and then 10 minutes later, something shifts. The emotional intensity fades. Your breathing slows. Your perspective widens. And suddenly you see it differently. You reread what you wrote, and there's a quiet realization that wasn't necessary. But it's already done. The damage isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. A tone that changes a relationship. A perception that shifts permanently. A door that quietly closes. And it all happened in less than 5 minutes. Let me give you another one. You're exhausted, not physically, mentally. It's been a long day. Too many decisions. Too many interruptions. Too much noise. And in that state, something small becomes overwhelming. A problem at work. A conversation that doesn't go your way. A moment of uncertainty. And your brain starts pushing you toward a decision. Just end this. Walk away. Say what you need to say and be done with it. It feels like clarity. But it's not clarity. It's fatigue wearing the mask of certainty. So you act. You make the call. You say the words. You decide to quit, pull back, disengage. And in that moment, again there is relief. Immediate. Clean, like pressure has been released. But that relief is temporary, because when your energy returns, when your mind stabilizes, you start to see the cost. Not just of the decision, but of the timing. This is how most people shape their lives. Not through long-term strategy, but through a series of short-term reactions. Moments of anger, moments of anxiety, moments of exhaustion. Each one feels small. Each one feels justified. But stacked together, they become a pattern. And that pattern becomes your reality. Relationships strain not because you didn't care, but because you reacted too quickly. Opportunities lost not because you weren't capable, but because you exited too early. Financial mistakes made not because you didn't understand the numbers, but because you followed the emotion. Let me ask you something. How many decisions in your life were made in a state you wouldn't trust today? Think about that carefully. Because most people don't fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because they allow temporary internal states to dictate permanent external outcomes. And here's the most dangerous part. In the moment, it doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like urgency. It feels like action. It feels like control. You believe you are taking charge of the situation, but in reality, you are being driven by it. This is the modern struggle. Not lack of information. Not lack of opportunity, but lack of emotional distance. You are living too close to your own reactions, too close to your impulses, too close to the immediate noise of your nervous system. So every decision becomes compressed into the present moment. What I feel right now, what will make this feeling stop? What action gives me relief? And when those become your decision filters, your future becomes unstable. Because your emotions are unstable. They shift. They spike. They fade. But your decisions, they stay. They compound. They define the trajectory of your life. And this is where the quiet regret begins to build. not from one catastrophic mistake, but from dozens of small, emotionally driven decisions that seem harmless at the time. A message you wish you didn't send, a reaction you wish you paused, a choice you made just to escape discomfort. And over time, a realization starts to form. You weren't outplayed. You weren't unlucky. You were simply too fast, too quick to react, too quick to decide, too quick to resolve feelings that didn't need immediate resolution. Let me ask you something more direct. Right now in your current life, where are you reacting instead of thinking? Is it in your work, your relationships, your finances, your communication? Because wherever that is, that's where your future is quietly being shaped, not by strategy, but by impulse. And unless you create distance, unless you learn to separate what you feel now from what actually matters later, you will continue making decisions that feel right in the moment, but cost you in the long run. What you just saw in your own life is not random. It is not a personality flaw. It is not a lack of discipline. It is a neurological bias, a distortion in how your brain perceives time, especially under emotional pressure. This is what we call time blindness, and it is one of the most underestimated forces shaping your decisions. Let's break it down carefully. When something triggers you, an email, a conversation, a financial shift, your brain does not process it as neutral information. It processes it as a potential threat. And the moment that happens, a very specific system activates. The amygdala. This is the part of your brain responsible for survival. It does not care about your long-term goals. It does not care about your reputation. It does not care about your future. It cares about one thing: resolve this now. So it floods your system with signals: urgency, tension, a need to act. Your heart rate increases. Your thoughts narrow. Your focus collapses onto the immediate problem. And here's where it becomes dangerous. At the same time this system activates your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic, planning, and long-term thinking, loses influence. Not completely, but enough. Enough that your ability to evaluate consequences becomes impaired. So now you're operating with a distorted hierarchy. Immediate relief feels more important than long-term stability. Temporary emotion feels more real than future consequence. And this is the essence of time blindness. Your brain is no longer seeing across time. It is locked into the present moment. Let me make this very real. In a calm state, you would never send that aggressive message. You would never make that impulsive financial decision. You would never walk away from something meaningful because of one difficult day. But in an activated state, those same decisions feel correct, even necessary, because your brain is not evaluating them across 10 months or 10 years. It is evaluating them across the next 10 minutes. What will make this feeling stop? That becomes the only question. And the answer is always the same. Act now. Release the pressure. Say the thing. Do the thing. End the discomfort. But here's the truth. The discomfort you are trying to escape is temporary. It will pass. Your nervous system will calm down. Your perspective will return. But the decision you make in that state, that doesn't pass. That stays. This is why people with high intelligence still make destructive choices. Because intelligence does not override biology. In the moment of emotional activation, biology wins. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked back at a decision and thought, I don't even recognize the version of me who did that? That's not exaggeration. That's neurochemistry. Because in that moment, you are operating under a different system, a compressed system, a short-term survival mode. And the more you repeat this pattern, the stronger it becomes. Because the brain learns quickly. If reacting immediately reduces discomfort, it reinforces that behavior. So next time, the urge comes faster, stronger, more convincing, and slowly, without realizing it, you become someone who reacts by default. Someone who cannot tolerate the space between emotion and action. Someone who confuses urgency with importance. Let me sharpen that. Urgency is almost always emotional. Importance is almost always long-term. But when you are time-blind, those two collapse into one. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels like it needs to be resolved immediately. And that creates a life filled with unnecessary decisions, unnecessary reactions, unnecessary damage. Think about your daily behavior. How often do you respond instantly instead of waiting? Decide quickly instead of thinking? Act emotionally instead of strategically? Not because you want to, but because it feels like you have to. That feeling is a trap. Because it's not coming from logic. It's coming from a system designed to protect you from immediate danger being misapplied to modern situations that require patience. Your brain is treating a difficult conversation like a physical threat, a market fluctuation like a survival risk, a moment of discomfort like something that must be eliminated immediately. But most of these situations do not require immediate action. They require perspective. They require distance. They require time. And without that time, you cannot think clearly. You cannot choose correctly. You cannot build anything stable. Let me ask you directly, how many of your worst decisions would have been avoided if you had simply waited, not solved the problem, not analyzed it deeply? Just waited 10 minutes, an hour, a day, because time does something powerful. It separates emotion from reality. It allows your prefrontal cortex to come back online. It restores your ability to see consequences. But when you remove that time, you remove your ability to think, and you become reactive, predictable, controlled by whatever you feel in the moment. This is the hidden problem. Not lack of intelligence, but lack of temporal distance. And until you build that distance deliberately, you will continue making decisions that feel right now but create problems later. There's a reason Warren Buffett is not just wealthy, but consistently right over decades. It's not because he has access to better information. It's not because he reacts faster. In fact, it's the opposite. He is slow, deliberately slow, and that slowness is his advantage. While the market moves in waves of fear and excitement, rapid, emotional, unpredictable, Buffett operates on a completely different timeline. He does not respond to daily fluctuations. He does not react to headlines. He does not let urgency dictate his decisions, because he understands something most people ignore. The market is driven by emotion, but wealth is built through patience. Let's make this practical. When the market drops sharply, what happens to most people? Panic. They check their portfolios constantly. They read alarming news. They feel the pressure to act. Sell before it gets worse. Protect what's left. Do something. That urge feels intelligent. It feels responsible. But it is the exact same mechanism we just discussed. Amygdala activation, time blindness, a need to resolve discomfort immediately. So they sell, they lock in losses, they exit positions that, given time, would have recovered and grown. And then, when the market stabilizes, they look back and realize, I reacted too fast. Buffett doesn't play that game. He does not make decisions based on how he feels today. He asks a different question entirely. What will this look like in 10 years? That question changes everything. because it removes him from the emotional noise of the present and places him in a strategic relationship with time. While others are reacting to the last 24 hours, he is thinking in decades, and this creates a kind of psychological insulation. He is not immune to emotion. He simply refuses to let emotion set the timeline. Think about how rare that is. In a world where everything is instant, he chooses delay. In a system designed to provoke reaction, he chooses observation. And that discipline compounds, not just financially, but cognitively. Because every time he doesn't react, he reinforces a different identity. Someone who does not need immediate resolution. Someone who can hold uncertainty without collapsing into action. Let me bring this closer to your life. You may not be managing billions of dollars, but you are managing something just as important. Your decisions, your relationships, your career, your reputation, your long-term direction. And in all of those areas, you are constantly exposed to emotional volatility, a message that triggers you, a situation that feels unfair, a moment that creates pressure. And in those moments, you have two options: react like the market or think like Buffett. One is fast, one is uncomfortable, but one creates stability and the other creates chaos. Here's what most people don't realize. Buffett's real skill is not picking stocks. It's controlling his timing of response. He understands that reacting quickly does not increase control, reduces it, because speed, when driven by emotion, disconnects you from consequence. Let me ask you something. If Buffett made decisions the way most people do, based on daily emotional fluctuations, would he still be successful? Of course not, because his entire strategy depends on distance. Distance from noise, distance from panic, distance from the illusion that something must be done immediately. And that same principle applies directly to you. Every time you feel the urge to act quickly, you're being pulled into a short-term frame, a compressed timeline where only the present matters. But the moment you step back even slightly, you expand your perspective. You start to see beyond immediate feeling. You start to recognize consequences. You start to think, this is what elite decision-making looks like. Not faster, not more intense, just more distant, more controlled, more aligned with reality over time. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people avoid this level of thinking because it requires them to sit in discomfort, to not react, to not resolve, to not escape the feeling immediately. Buffett can watch millions disappear on paper and do nothing. Most people cannot tolerate a single uncomfortable conversation without reacting. That's the gap. Not intelligence, not opportunity, but emotional discipline across time. So the question becomes very simple. When pressure hits, when emotion spikes, when everything in you wants to act immediately, can you pause? Can you widen your timeline? Can you choose not just what feels right now, but what will still make sense years from now? Because that is the difference between reacting and deciding. And that difference is where your future is built. Now that you understand the biology and you've seen what disciplined thinking looks like at the highest level, we need to go one layer deeper. Because your behavior is not random. It is structured. There's a loop running in the background of your life, quietly shaping how you respond to pressure, conflict, and uncertainty. And once you see this loop, clearly you'll start recognizing it everywhere. It's what we call the impulse reaction loop, and it works like this. It begins with a trigger, something small, a message you didn't expect, a tone you didn't like, a situation that creates uncertainty. Nothing extreme, but enough to shift your internal state. Then comes a spike, Emotion rises. It could be anger, anxiety, defensiveness, fear. Your body reacts before your mind fully processes. Your breathing changes. Your thoughts accelerate. Your focus narrows. And in that moment, something else appears. An urge, a very specific urge. Do something. Respond. Fix it. Say something. Take control. And here's where most people get trapped. They interpret that urge as intelligence. They believe that acting quickly means they are being decisive, strong, in control. But in reality, that urge is not strategy. It is discomfort looking for relief. So they move into the next step. Reaction. They send the message. They make the decision. They take the action. And immediately after there's a shift. Relief. The pressure drops. The tension releases. And for a brief moment, it feels like the right move. But that feeling is misleading. Because what just happened was not resolution. It was discharge. You removed emotional pressure, but you did not improve the situation. And now comes the final stage. Consequence. Not immediate, not always obvious, but real. A relationship becomes strained. A decision limits future options. A situation escalates instead of stabilizing. And now you're dealing with something more complex than the original trigger. But here's the most important part. Your brain doesn't focus on the consequence. It focuses on the relief. It remembers. When I acted quickly, I felt better. So the next time a trigger appears, the loop runs faster, stronger, more automatic. Trigger emotion, urge reaction relief. Again, and again, and again. Let me ask you something. How many times have you acted quickly just to make a feeling go away? Not because it was the best decision, but because it was the fastest way to stop the discomfort. That is the loop. And the more you follow it, the less control you actually have. Because now, your behavior is being driven by emotional spikes, not deliberate thought. Let's sharpen this even further. Reaction feels like control, but it is the opposite. Real control requires the ability to not act immediately, to hold the tension, to sit inside the urge without obeying it. And that is extremely difficult because your brain is wired to avoid discomfort. So it will generate very convincing narratives. If you don't respond now, you'll lose respect. If you don't act now, it will get worse. If you wait, you'll regret it. These thoughts feel logical, but they are often just emotional justifications, ways to push you back into the loop. And here's where it becomes dangerous. The more you react, the less tolerance you have for delay. Your window between feeling and action becomes shorter. At first, maybe you react after a few minutes, then after a few seconds, eventually almost instantly. And at that point, you are no longer choosing your behavior. You are executing a pattern, predictable, reactive, easy to trigger. Think about that. In high-stakes situations, your career, your relationships, your finances, you're operating on a loop that prioritizes relief over results. And unless you interrupt that loop, no amount of intelligence will save you. Because intelligence does not matter if it never gets time to operate. Let me ask you directly. When was the last time you felt a strong emotional urge and didn't act on it? Not distracted yourself, not suppressed it, but actually sat with it and chose not to respond. For most people, that's rare, because they've trained themselves to resolve feelings immediately. But here's the truth. The ability to pause is the beginning of power, because the moment you insert even a small gap between impulse and action, you break the loop. You give your prefrontal cortex time to come back online. You allow perspective to return. And that's where real decisions are made, not in the spike, not in the urgency, but in the space after it. And this is what we're about to build, a system that forces that space, a framework that interrupts the loop before it completes. Because once the loop completes, you're no longer deciding. You're just reacting. At this point, you understand the mechanism. You've seen the biology. You've seen the pattern. You probably recognize yourself in more than one moment. But let me stop you right here, because this is where most people make a mistake. They think understanding equals control. It doesn't. Awareness without interruption is just observation. So let me ask you something directly. The next time you feel that surge, the anger, the anxiety, the urgency to act, what are you going to do differently? Not what you should do. What will you actually do? Because if your answer is unclear, then nothing changes. You will go back into the same loop. You will react the same way. And this entire conversation becomes just another moment of insight without transformation. So decide now, are you going to keep reacting at the speed of your emotions, or are you going to install a system that forces you to think beyond them? Because what comes next only works if you're willing to use it. This is where control becomes practical, not theoretical, not philosophical, operational. A simple, repeatable system that forces your brain out of time blindness and back into perspective. It's called the October 10th 10 rule, and it is non-negotiable. Every meaningful decision must pass through this filter, not occasionally, not when you feel calm. Every time. Here's how it works. Step 1. The 10-minute question before you act, you ask, how will I feel about this decision in 10 minutes? This is not about logic yet. This is about emotional awareness. Because most of the time, what you're feeling right now will not exist in 10 minutes. Anger fades. Anxiety drops. Urgency dissolves. But in the moment, it feels permanent. So this question creates the first layer of distance. It forces you to recognize this feeling is temporary, and that alone weakens its control. Let me make it practical. You're about to send a message. You're triggered. You want to respond. Pause. Ask, in 10 minutes will I still feel this intensity? Most of the time the answer is no, and that pause is enough to stop a mistake. Step 2. The 10-month question. Now we expand the timeline. How will I feel about this decision in 10 months? This is where perspective begins. Because 10 months from now, the emotional charge of this moment will be gone. Completely. So what remains? The consequence. The result of your action. This question forces you to separate emotion from outcome. For example, will this message strengthen the relationship or damage it? Will this decision move me forward or create regret? Now you're thinking differently, not as someone trying to feel better, but as someone trying to choose correctly. Step 3, the 10-year question. Now we go further. How will I feel about this in 10 years? This is where identity comes in, because at this level you're no longer thinking about the situation. You're thinking about who you are becoming. Will this decision align with the person I want to be? Will I respect this version of myself? Will this moment matter, or will it look small? Most emotionally driven decisions collapse under this question because they are short-term by nature. They do not survive long timelines. And that's the point. This question filters out everything that is reactive and keeps only what is meaningful. Step 4. The mandatory delay protocol. Now we make the system real. You do not make high-stakes decisions in a heightened emotional state. Period. No exceptions. If the decision involves conflict, money, relationships, major direction, you wait. Minimum 24 hours. Why? Because time restores cognitive balance. It allows your nervous system to reset. It brings your prefrontal cortex back online. It gives you access to clarity. And here's the truth. If a decision cannot survive 24 hours, it probably shouldn't be made. Step 5. Emotional labeling. When the emotion hits you, name it. Not analyze it. Not justify it. Name it. I am angry. I am anxious. I feel threatened. This does something powerful. It shifts activity away from the amygdala and back toward the prefrontal cortex. It creates separation. You are no longer inside the emotion. You are observing it, and that alone reduces its intensity. Now let's bring this together. The next time you feel the urge to react, you do not trust that urge. You process it. 10 minutes, 10 months, 10 years. Then you wait. Then you decide. Not quickly, not emotionally, but deliberately. And yes, this will feel slow. It will feel unnatural because you are interrupting a pattern that has been running for years. But this is where control is built, not in dramatic moments, in small pauses, repeated consistently. Let me ask you something. How different would your life look if your last 10 emotional decisions had gone through this filter? Think about that carefully, because this is not about perfection. You will still feel emotions. You will still experience pressure. But now you have a system, and systems change outcomes. Now slow this down, because this is where everything becomes personal, not theoretical, not strategic. Personal. You now have a system. You understand the loop. You understand the biology. You understand how easily a moment can distort your judgment. But none of that matters if you don't confront how you've been living. So let me ask you something directly. How many decisions in your life were made just to escape a feeling? Not to build something. Not to protect something meaningful. Just to stop discomfort. Be honest. Because most people don't destroy their future in one catastrophic moment. They do it in small, emotionally driven reactions repeated over time. A message sent too quickly. A conversation handled poorly. A decision made in fatigue. Each one feels minor, but together they form a pattern. And that pattern becomes your identity. Let me ask you something deeper. When you feel pressure, who are you? Not who you want to be. Not who you say you are. Who are you in the moment where it actually matters? Are you someone who pauses or someone who reacts? Because that version of you is the one shaping your life. Not your intentions, not your plans, your patterns. Another question. How often do you confuse urgency with importance? Something feels intense, so you assume it must be dealt with immediately. But is it actually important or just emotionally loud? Think about your last few reactions. Did they improve the situation or just relieve the feeling? There's a difference, and that difference is everything. Let me go further. Are you using your intelligence to build your life or to justify your impulses? Because intelligent people are very good at this. They can explain anything. They can rationalize any reaction. They can make emotional decisions sound logical. But underneath that, the pattern remains the same. Fast reaction, short-term relief, long-term cost. And over time, that creates a quiet form of regret. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a growing awareness that you could have handled things differently, better, more deliberately. Let me ask you something you might not want to answer. How many opportunities have you lost not because you weren't capable, but because you reacted too quickly? How many relationships have been strained because you chose speed over understanding? How many decisions have you made that felt right in the moment but wrong in hindsight? Pause on that, because this is not about guilt. It's about clarity. If you continue to operate the same way, nothing changes. Same triggers, same reactions, same outcomes, just repeated over a longer timeline. And that's how a decade passes, not through failure, but through unexamined behavior. So here's the real question. Are you willing to become someone who can wait? Not passively, not avoidantly, but deliberately. Someone who can feel the urge and not obey it. Someone who can sit in discomfort without needing immediate resolution. Someone who values long-term alignment over short-term relief. Because that is a different identity, and it requires a different standard. One more question. If every decision you make from today forward was evaluated by your future self, would anything change? Would you speak differently? Act differently? Pause more? Because that future version of you is already being built, decision by decision, moment by moment. And whether you realize it or not, you're either strengthening that version or undermining it. There is something you need to see clearly before we close this. Your environment is not designed for patience. It is designed for reaction. Everything around you, notifications, messages, markets, conversations, is structured to trigger you, to pull you into immediacy, to make you feel like something must be done right now, because reaction keeps you engaged. Waiting does not. Thinking does not. Distance does not. So the system constantly compresses your timeline. Shorter decisions, faster responses, more urgency. And if you don't resist, that you will live in a permanent state of reactivity, always responding, never directing, always adjusting, never deciding. And that is how control is lost. Not all at once, but gradually, through hundreds of small, unfiltered reactions. So now this becomes very simple. Again, simple, not easy. You stop reacting immediately. You don't trust your first impulse. You don't assume urgency means importance. You create space. Every time, between what you feel and what you do. And in that space you think, not emotionally, not defensively, but deliberately. You run the filter. 10 minutes, 10 months, 10 years. You ask better questions. You allow your nervous system to settle. And then you choose. This is discipline. Not forcing yourself to feel nothing, but refusing to let feeling decide everything. It is the ability to hold tension without collapsing into action. It is the strength to delay when everything in you wants to move. It is a decision to protect your future from your present state. And understand this clearly. The people who build stable, powerful lives are not the ones who react fastest. They are the ones who respond best. They create distance. They widen time. They refuse to let temporary emotion define permanent outcomes. So here is your standard. From this point forward, no important decision is made in a heightened emotional state. No reaction is immediate. No impulse is trusted without question. You pause. You process. You decide. And yes, it will feel uncomfortable. You will feel the urge to act. You will feel the pressure to resolve things quickly. Ignore it. That pressure is not guidance. It is conditioning. And every time you resist it, you take back control. Every time you wait, you strengthen your mind. Every time you choose long-term alignment over short-term relief, you build something most people never develop: stability, clarity, power. So the next time you feel that surge, that urgency, that need to act, immediately stop. Not later. Not after you've already reacted. Right there. Pause. because your future is not destroyed in one decision. It is shaped in the space between impulse and action, and that space is now yours to control. If you are ready to stop letting temporary moods destroy your permanent legacy, subscribe and master your internal state.